You'll be able to find this event from coloradogifted.org on the web, and then click on the resources banner where you'll find Conversations with CAGT, Facebook Live. Tonight we have Dr. Mike Postma. He's a teacher, administrator, consultant, speaker, and author, and he's dedicated to the holistic development of both gifted and twice exceptional children through his new company, Gifted and Thriving, LLC. So over the last couple decades, Dr. Postma has worked in the field of gifted and talented education as a teacher and administrator in the public and charter school system, Minnesota, North Carolina. And he was the architect of the Minnetonka Navigator Program, which is a magnet school specifically designed for highly gifted and twice exceptional students. Dr. Postma has a number of publications, articles, 2 books. The latest is titled The Inconvenient Student. I think you have a book coming out within the next year or 2, don't you? In a couple, within.
We're working on a book on the intersection between trauma and intelligence.
Trauma and intelligence. The last one, The Inconvenient Student, is critical issues in the identification and education of twice exceptional students. So Dr. Postma travels and speaks nationally and internationally and virtually, as in here, on a variety of gifted and school-related topics. He lives in Bellingham, Washington, and he's the father of 4 children, 3 of whom are twice exceptional. So welcome tonight to Anxiety and its Impact on Gifted and Twice Exceptional Children, Teens, and Young Adults. Thanks, Dr. Postma.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me, first of all. And thank you, folks, for tuning in. This, I have to give credit where credit is due, sorry. Dr. Sharon Celine and I, Dr. Sharon Celine's out of the Massachusetts area. We've just completed yesterday a 6-week workshop on anxiety. So some of the material here has come from some of those workshops we do with young adults and with teens. We do that twice a year, spring and fall. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that for her. And I also wanted to mention 2 of our kids, the twice exceptional kids, who really struggled with anxiety to a real deep degree. One was fairly chronic and was homebound for most of his high school career, and still struggles at 22 with the concept of anxiety and metacognitive self. We also have a daughter who's highly gifted artist and also struggles with the same type of issues, but in a very different way. And so this is a really, really interesting topic to me. Been working on this for quite some time. And I hope, this is a short presentation in a sense that's going to encapsulate very much a tip of the iceberg in terms of this topic. So I hope you bear with me, and I will probably skip through some slides and focus more on some others. And bottom line is, if you have questions at the end, you can always contact us for more information. So, all right, so bottom line, we're going to look at some of our learning objectives for tonight. We'll try to get through this, describe how anxiety works in the brain and the body, identifying patterns of negative thinking, developing the ability to externalize anxiety, reduce its influence, practical tools for dealing with kids with worries, and identifying and developing areas of resistance. Once again, let's hope we get through this stuff. So here we go. Bottom line, we are in uncertain times. I've actually never seen an epidemic within an epidemic that is anxiety right now that I'm seeing across the board, not just nationally, but internationally. All the typical markers that we've relied on in the past are now absent. We don't know what's coming tomorrow or the next day or the next day, right? There's just so much uncertainty in terms of the future. And our kids are feeling it, and they're feeling it really in a deep way. And it's turning them into anxious beings. And quite honestly, as I'll talk in the next slide, they are kind of wired that way anyways. So previous coping skills may not currently apply because they just don't work anymore or are harder to access based on the worries that our kids have. the whole pandemic that we had to deal with, the state of the world, the state of politics, the state of the ecosystem, the whole works. We are really in dealing with novel transitions without a real clear roadmap. And one of the things in working with literally hundreds and hundreds of gifted and twice exceptional kids is an understanding and a predictability and a certainty in terms of moving forward. That is what keeps us calm and keeps us motivated to continue to do what we do, right? Having a clear map is really, really essential for our gifted kids. And right now, it's just not there. Coming back to school after 2 years of being away, some of our kids loved being online, some of our kids hated it, but it really is different. And then, of course, we are looking at continued issues across the board, even for our families. And for our gifted kids, they feed off of our energy. So if we see and feel that their parents are dealing with anxiety and stress, they pick that up without even knowing, without even the parents talking about it. It's through our expressions, our nuances, our nonverbals, and they can feel and they adapt it. So yes, we're seeing bottom a lot of anxiety. So what are the root causes of what we're seeing in our kids? Well, first of all, they're neuro-vulnerable, meaning they're atypical in their growth in terms of their brain and body. From a metaphysical perspective, our kids are more vulnerable. They take in more epigenetic signatures at a faster rate. And what I mean by that is sensory prints. So as you grow and develop, you bring in sensory prints from all 5 of your senses. Now, the farther you get along the scale in terms of a difference to 3, 4 standard deviations from a norm, the more sensory information is coming in and invading the child's brain. Okay, I wouldn't say invading because it's knowledge, but as they grow, they are vulnerable because that information overload is overwhelming what we call their limbic system, their mammalian part of their brain, that fight, flight, freeze mentality they have, that everybody has in terms of survival. So it's wired in terms of being more vulnerable because of the amount of sensory information that they're getting and not being able to handle. So if you see gifted kids or 2E kids with sensory issues, that's that overwhelmed presence of sensory prints, right? So because of that, that limbic system can take over the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking, concentration, problem solving, executive functioning part of the brain, right? We need the two parts of the brain to be in balance for kids to feel productive, to feel like they're safe, right? So the brain grows and develops from the front to the back, inside out. We have the reptilian part, the mammalian part, and then the human part, which is that prefrontal cortex. The limbic part is made up probably of 3 areas, but I'm going to focus on one, which is the amygdala. Now, the amygdala, we know just from biological perspectives or evidence that in gifted and twice exceptional kids, especially again, if you're farther from the norm, it can be up to 85% larger in our kids. Now that amygdala, once again, is the trigger, right? If we're getting so much sensory information and it's positive, negative, and neutral information, that amygdala is reacting in a sense to all that information in a fight, flight, freeze mentality, unless our prefrontal cortex is in control and is able to calm the limbic system. So why do we see our kids struggling with emotional regulation? Is because the balance, the asynchrony is off a little bit there. So now we add anxiety, we add all kinds of more negative sensory prints as our kids are growing up. We're adding to the overwhelm factor in the brain. We're adding to the stresses on the brain. And so the brain is reacting more in a limbic mode rather than a human mode. Now, that's what anxiety is. It's worry in action. Is they take in all those worries, and it's the physical effect of those worries throughout the body, right? So what happens is we see our kids dealing with anxiety, and what we see is they're scanning for threats on a continual basis because that living in that limbic mode. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So they start catastrophizing things. They start developing a negative narrative in their mind in terms of how life is going, how friendships are going, how school is going, all those things, though, all that sensory integration keeps pounding, 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 and it elevates them to become much more vulnerable. Now, again, triggering that vagal nerve, which again through the central nervous system. So we see the anxiety literally from a metaphysical standpoint invading all parts of the body, the stomach, sweating, heart rate, all those things are affected in terms of when a child is dealing with anxiety. And again, reinforced regulative rumination, the pressures of life, the existential angst of everything going around me that I have no control over. And of course, I mentioned the asynchrony. So what we're saying is, as our kids grow and develop, if they're not guided in a positive manner, and if they're not guided in terms of understanding themselves metacognitively, they are more vulnerable to having anxiety. They're more vulnerable in terms of running into issues where they feel different, where they feel isolated, where they feel strange or weird, which again, all those factors produce anxiety. So what is giftedness anyways? I'm not going to jump into that, but from my perspective, we're talking about that asynchronous piece, the intellect being there and processing at a higher rate, but unable to control the emotional development, the emotional reactions to all those things, in terms of how I deal with life and what's going on around me, whether it's school, whether it's home or somewhere else. So when we deal with 2E kids, it gets even worse because we're dealing with an innate, something that is there that is automatically going to, how should I put it? You're setting up for anxiety because you have high intelligence and then you have a disability. So you have coexisting conditions, in essence, that, is a breeding ground for anxiety because you can't make sense of yourself. How can I do this so well and yet struggle with this? How can I be so smart and yet I can't read very well? How is it that I am so smart and I can't concentrate or focus on something? Why am I all over the place? Why am I so smart and yet I struggle to make relationships on a social level? All those different things, right? So we're adding that uniqueness of those 2E profiles, and we're adding to that the anxious factor because of the way we view and live life. So we see, again, adding to anxiety, misdiagnosis. I dealt with one young lady who was misdiagnosed and kind of lived that diagnosis for 10 years until it completely shut her down. We're seeing labels at school. They're being lazy, they're not doing the work, etc., adding more anxiety, more stress, right? And then I'm going to keep rolling here. So what do we see in our gifted kids, in our twice exceptional kids? Look at all those different things you see: advanced comprehension to nuances, unusual emotional depth, intense feelings and reactions, right? It's that sensory intake again that overwhelms, and then that intensity increases and increases, and sometimes it ends up in meltdowns, right? Because that prefrontal cortex is losing control over sanity, not sanity, that's the wrong word, losing control over reason in a sense. Sometimes long attention span and persistence with 2E, not very often. Here's the big one: preoccupation with their own thoughts and an impatient with self and others' inabilities and slowness, right? That's another one in terms of causing anxiety and separating those kids from their peers in a sense. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Social interaction, inconsistent performance, disorganization, low executive functioning. Again, that's a product of asynchrony. Inertia, difficult with transitions. All those are the classic characteristics and struggles that feed anxiety in our kids. And the last one is fatigue. We see a lot of our kids are gifted 2E kids code switching throughout the day, meaning that where they feel really safe, for instance, at home, and they're in their room and they're in their space, and it's just like a relief, right? I'm finally in a safe place. That mind, that being, versus a being, let's say at school, where I'm isolated. The teachers aren't understanding me. They're not giving me a chance. They're not giving me a break. They're calling me lazy. They're disciplining me for neurological responses, which I don't understand. I start feeling guilt, shame, et cetera, right? Again, I'm putting everything in one bucket here. And, I'm guessing if you're here, you understand that not everything happens to all kids, but this is very typical in terms of what I see with twice exceptionality and even with gifted, especially highly gifted. So all these things lend themselves to added anxiety. Writing, taking tests, all those different pieces are more difficult in exam. Again, driving a car. My daughter's almost 20, she'll be 22 this year and still does not have her license, right? Her awareness of self and that anxiety drives that to the point where she just can't, she just can't do it. So a lot of these everyday things that we feel and expect our kids to be able to do very normally can be challenges and can induce more anxiety and stress. All right. Okay. So in essence, we have intense limbic development accompanied by extraordinary sensory processing, that those epigenetics that come in. And what I didn't mention is there's more white matter, denser white matter in terms of intaking information with our gifted 2E kids. And then there's more gray matter as well for distributing that information through the entire body. So again, they're set up for lots of knowledge and lots of processing, but the inability to manage that in a reasonable manner. So this is what we see with a lot of our kids. That intersection, that busy intersection, lots of stuff coming in, lots of stuff going out. One's going one way, one's going the other way, all over the place, right? And they're trying to manage this on a daily basis, 24/7. And again, sometimes that becomes too much. The fatigue, the stress, the anxiety takes over. So what do we see when we look at increased anxiety and depression? We see constant scanning for threats. We see catastrophizing. We see what if thoughts and worries. What if this is going to happen? What if this is going to happen? Again, that moves into that catastrophizing. The what ifs become almost unbelievable in a sense, and they turn into unreliable emotional messages, right? I can't say hello to that person because I know they already will not accept me. Things like that. Interpreting predictions as facts, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. Never going to work. I already know, blah, 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 right? They get into that helpless stage, that inertia so quickly when they're dealing with anxiety. They feel hopeless. They feel helpless. They can't change in a sense, right? Because so much information, once again, is coming at them, and it's gotten them into a point where they're living limbically. And by the way, when you're living in your limbic system, your cognitive functionality goes down way, way, way down. You descend in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs into finding safety. Your brain keeps telling you, I need a safe place to operate. I need a safe place to operate. And I will do whatever it takes to get there, right? I always recommend it to my teachers. What is your safe zone in your classroom? What is that safe place? I don't care if it's high school or kindergarten. Where is that place when a kid starts to feel threatened, when they start to feel off, when they start to feel the angst in their belly starting to rise up, and they don't know how to control it, they don't know how to handle it? What are you going to do, right? You should already have preset signals with that child in terms of nonverbal saying, yeah, I'm starting to get a little verklempt here. Then you can redirect them into a safe place. All of our classrooms where I was in schools and administrating had either a table with a blanket over it with lots of cushy things underneath and squeezies and books and pillows and even teddy bears and things that they could just bring into themselves, weighted blankets to release the anxiety, to release the stress, and then they could come back online and then rejoin the classroom in a sense. So what are you doing in your classroom? What are you doing in your home when you're seeing your child really getting out of control and starting to, negatively ruminate to a point where it gets, really bad? What is the exit strategy? How are you taking them and coming alongside them and feeling what they feel, even though you can't, right? You shouldn't be reassuring them, but you should be coming alongside and saying, you know what, I don't quite understand what you're feeling right now, but I'm here for you, and I will be here for you in the long term. And then let's redirect to somewhere else where you can feel safer. Right. Now, this one comes from my colleague, Sharon Celine, and she calls these the 5 C's of successful neurodiverse parenting and teaching. Number one is self-control, right? Teaching and maintaining your own self-control so that you're not getting emotionally involved while your child is dealing with anxiety. Too often as parents, we start to get into the emotional stage with our parents, and then we can't help them properly because we're feeling the same angst. We're not sure what to do, and it gets a little out of control. Sometimes it can even get, when the kids are older, teens or in high school, even young adults, it starts becoming almost an interaction, an emotional, angry interaction. You can do this. Why does this keep happening, et cetera, rather than coming alongside and being by them. So keep your own in terms of that self-control. Compassion. If we don't have compassion, we will never understand. This also means getting to know what's going on as a teacher with those kids that might be more vulnerable to anxiety. It is more imperative to really understand those kids even more than all of your other kids, because they need it. They need someone on their side. They need an ally in their classroom to help them understand themselves, not only metacognitively, but what to do when they start to feel angst, what they start to feel anxiety and stress and frustration and all those things. Compassion, you can't, in essence, live in their shoes, but you have to understand that neurodiverse difference in terms of all that sensory information and how they can handle it on a daily basis. If you don't understand that, it's really difficult to be compassionate when they're struggling with lots of, stimuli. Collaboration, working together, obviously, with them, developing a plan in terms of building a successful, understanding of what anxiety is, what it means. When I work with kids in anxiety, I start with the brain, and I do a full, thorough workshop just on the brain. What's going on inside your brain when you're feeling anxious? Why do you feel anxious? What's happening when you're getting overwhelmed by sensory input? All those different things. And what can you do about it? How can you identify it? How can you name it? How can you find patterns in your anxiety and start to recognize anxiety before it even starts? Those kind of things. So consistency, a consistent approach to understanding your anxiety and doing something about it has got to be in place day in, day out. For instance, one of the biggest things we do in the moment is breathing exercises. This is not a long-term solution, but when you breathe in and breathe out in a consistent manner, in a pattern, 4 in, and if you're listening, try it, 4 in, 4 hold, and 6 out. It is the actual 6 out that is actually the stimulant in terms of through the vagal nerve, through the nervous system that allows the child to relax. Teach your kids how to do that. And by the way, you do that 6, 7 times in a row, right? Give them the space to be able to breathe, to be able to let go of some of that tension that's building up inside, right? I have my kids that I work with every morning, every night, 5 times. Breathe in, hold, breathe out slowly, relaxing with your eyes closed, letting the stress go. Other kids, in terms of consistency, need grounding. They need a place where they can come back and release those tensions, release the anxiety. I had a young man I work with who happened to live in Arizona. The school day would overwhelm him, right? To the point where he was ready to give it to anybody when he got home, right? He'd say no, and he'd be very argumentative. That's not, him being defiant behavior. It's him struggling with his own anxiety and trying to figure out a way to recollect himself. After much searching, we found that his way to release was swimming. Not the actual act of swimming, but floating in the pool. That feeling of weightlessness and breathing combined helped him to get back into his regular self. So his parents did not interrupt him or interact with him when he came home from school for a full hour. Why? Because nothing was getting done. He would respond in anger, and then they would return in anger, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, going nowhere. So until we found his grounding thing, which could be a walk in nature, it could be going for a run, it could be floating in the pool, it could be anything, right? Biking. Once they found that consistent approach, it was so much easier for them to handle the home dynamics. And it also gave him tools in the moment at school when he's starting to feel the angst come up, et cetera, et cetera. Now with younger kids, you want to do it more often, right? Because they don't have the same control. They sometimes can't get through the full day. So giving them squeezy toys, giving them movement breaks, giving them breathing techniques, all those different things should be built right into their daily schedule, along with a safe plan and a safe zone plan, so that they in turn can, oh geez, I'm way behind already. So they in turn can find solace and reset themselves from a limbic perspective, so that they can again get back to the wonderful gifts that they have in terms of reasoning, in terms of intelligence, in terms of problem solving, right? That's where we want them. And then celebrate successes. When you're dealing with a child with anxiety, or maybe even yourself having anxiety, because in many cases, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We already know that, right? So the combination in terms of nature versus nurture, the genetic gene pool is still part of this. Again, that's another presentation. But celebrate the successes and record them. Record them. Why are we recording celebration? Because when your child overcomes and makes a baby step in terms of fighting anxiety, you want a record of that. Because the next time you can say and turn around and say, remember Bobby, we did this before, right? You did it before. We have a record of that. And then let's do it again. Let's try it again. What techniques did we use that time? Do you remember? Oh, I got them written down right here. Okay, let's try this again. If it doesn't work, we can try something else. But celebrate the successes, right? This is a lifelong battle. Anxiety does not go away. What we need is tools to learn how to accommodate that anxiety, so that they in turn, as they age and mature and grow, can take those tools and push anxiety back. All right, so that's Dr. Sharon Celine. I do have a information on her at the end. I'm not going to do the poll now because we literally only have 10 minutes. So again, I talked about this, unreliable emotional messages. I did not talk about the CDDC reports, which are very low in terms of anxiety compared to gifted. That's way low. Last records I had in terms of gifted kids, it was more around 40, sometimes even 50%. And I suspect it's greater than that. So just for that, I'm not going to go through the study, but check it out. Karpinski, Kolb, Tetrode, and Borowski basically interviewed all these folks, and you can see anxiety disorders and high intelligence combined at 37%. National average is right there. You can see that high intelligence diagnosed, meaning the folks that were diagnosed, and then the last number is not diagnosed and diagnosed, so it's combined. But you can see all the, the vulnerabilities sitting right there in front of you. Mood disorders, ASD, ADHD, all that stuff is highly increased when we're dealing with gifted kids. More anxiety, again, is mind-body. Remember, it's worry, and it's the body's response to worry. It's disproportionate reactions. It's dealing with false alarms, all or nothing thinking. And again, perfectionism, procrastination are forms of anxiety. Now, there are actually positive perfectionism and positive procrastination, but there's also very poisonous perfectionism, poisonous procrastination. I don't have time to get into those. Again, some more information. The bottom line is both can cause extreme anxiety, and if it's if it's not dealt with. So keep that in mind. Here again, productive worry is worrying about things and doing things that are motivating. Poisonous worries, things that we can't control, and it's debilitating. Again, I don't have enough time to go through these. The typical teens worries, you know that already, so I'm going to whip through that one. I'm not going to go through the examples because I want to get to some things that we can do. I kind of talked about this already. I'm going to go through the poll. Sorry, folks, 40 minutes is not enough. So, different approach to managing anxiety in TUI children and teens and gifted as well. Manage your own reaction to their concerns. Try to get in their shoes. Try to figure out and come alongside and use compassion once again, right? You don't know exactly what their day was like. You didn't know what they're going through. Maybe they had an argument with a friend, and maybe that's the only friend they had. And they started to get anxious and catastrophize the fact that I'll never have a friend again, right? Come alongside. Teach effective tools to manage that anxiety, which I just talked about briefly. Use validation, not reassurance. It's going to be okay. It's going to be, no, they don't want to hear that. They want to know that, yes, this worry is founded, this anxiety is founded, right? But I'm going to be there to help you. You're validating their experiences, not reassuring them and telling them unrealistic things, because in an anxious state, they're not going to believe you. Avoiding anxiety just makes it stronger. So we want our kids to change their relationship to that worry. We want them to name that worry, put it in a form so that they can battle it. We want to teach them coping skills based on collaboration. We are going to put a plan together on your anxiety, and we're going to work through it together. We're going to set achievable goals, and then we're going to check back and make sure we're seeing those goals and how we're doing. So this is the biggest one. Out of the 6-week workshop we just completed, this was what our teens and young adults told us was the most effective, was identifying that goal I just talked about and saying, I want to blank. Okay, I want to make a friend. So I'm willing to, boom, boom, boom. So I'm willing to go up to someone and say hi, even though I'm terrified of it. I'm willing to sit in the cafeteria with someone I don't know, even though I'm terrified, right? And then we're going to shift the focus from what isn't working to things that are working, right? If we look in the past, this is back to the record keeping. What has been working in the past to help us battle, right? So what is working and what's not working? What have we tried that isn't going anywhere? Well, let's navigate to what we think is going to work. And then rely on past successes, to me, is that journaling, right? You continue to improve coping skills and fostering a better growth mindset when you have an understanding that I've done this before, right? One of the things I don't mention here is probability. One of the biggest tools in terms of working with kids when they're having catastrophic thoughts and anxiety and negative rumination is because they're worrying about things that seem and feel out of control, right? So what I try to do with them is I try to develop systematic math probability into the fears, right? So I am terrified to go and say hello to this person because, I know they're going to reject me. I know they're going to think I'm a geek, or I know they're going to blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's break that down. What are the odds and chances in that sense that if you go up to this person is going to outright reject you and just walk away? Okay, we calculate that. Well, once we get down to it, it's probably 90% that they're not going to do that. That's a pretty good odd. Okay. Again, I want to meet the person, 90% chance that they will say hi back, and we've opened a dialogue. Okay. So then I'm willing to blah, blah, blah. So using probability can take away those catastrophic fears because they just don't make any sense when you look at the probability, right? And then you practice those responses. I want to say hi to you and make a new friend. So I'm willing to engage in a conversation. I'm willing to say hi. I'm willing to talk about some interests that they might have. Okay. Practice that with your child. Practice that with your team. Okay. First step, say hello, hi. Second step, what can you talk about? Right? Make sure they're prepared, just like you would prepare for an interview. Okay. Now you can apply that to all kinds of different anxieties and stresses. I know I'm going to do poorly on this test. Right? A real common one. Okay. What are the odds of that? What are the odds of you flunking that test? Well, if I don't study this and that, yeah, well, you are going to study. We know because you have some perfectionist tendencies. How many times have you flunked tests before when you were prepared? Oh, never. Okay, so there's a 100% chance that you are not going to flunk this test. You might get a B, but if I'm willing to study and be prepared, you'll probably get an A. Okay, all right, I can deal with that. I can live with that. All right, again, I'm just giving you little short shots, but they're important. So stop reassuring, just encourage, right? Reassurance just gives you that short-term relief and sometimes no relief at all, right? Because it's unrealistic. Yeah, just get over it. Well, no, I can't. Stay neutral, compassionate. Don't be the fixer. I'm so guilty of this when our kids were younger. I would always jump in and start offering solutions. Oh, why don't you try this? Why don't you do this? You know, blah, 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 without sitting and listening to what their needs were, listening intently and not even saying a word sometimes, so I can develop a trust relationship with that child, especially as a teacher, because that's not inherent right away with gifted kids, 2E kids, right? Come alongside, listen, listen, listen. And then, of course, the worst case scenario, which I kind of hinted at in terms of, well, you know, if you get to the worst case scenario, it just gets pretty ridiculous in terms of some of our anxious thoughts. Small risks. When you're dealing with anxiety, you are talking about baby steps. All right. For instance, if you have someone that has had a trigger incident in the past, a negative incident that, you know, is lingering there, we know in gifted and 2E kids sometimes that those negative sensory information, those negative epigenetics can last for a long time and imprint themselves deeply and just come up, you know, at any time. But really encouraging them to take small risks to move forward rather than backward. And you can see the small steps turn into big steps. All right, cues and curiosity. Control what you can. Again, repeating myself here a little bit, but be curious about it. Be curious about it. Instead of fearing something, what could go happen? I call this pleasure prediction. Okay. I'm really, I don't want to go to that social event because I know I'll you know, they're not going to listen to it. They're not going to want to talk to me. You know, the whole list comes out, right? Boom, boom, boom. Well, let's choose curiosity. What might happen? What might be something real positive that might happen in that particular scenario? Okay, let's think about that, right? Change the script. Finally, stop, reflect on what the child is or isn't doing and try to figure out a way. Look, closely observe. This is something that's for a teacher really important in terms of observing, and then listening is that bottom one. And I think I'm right out of time here. Thank you. This is my email. Unfortunately, because this is a shared presentation with Dr. Sharon, I cannot share the slides with you. However, I can always answer any of your questions, and you can go to our website at giftedandthriving.com. We've got lots of resources there. You can sign up and blah, blah, blah. And then Sharon's contacts at the bottom there. She's got her specialty is actually ADD. Yeah, so that's that. And I'm going to stop the share here and jump back in with Mark. And look at that, 40 minutes on the dot.
Yeah, well, I've got this really full and messy note card that as I was trying to frantically scribble things down, and then you would say something else and I would forget what I was writing, right? Because I can only focus on one piece of language at a time. So there's much more I'd like to know. And I think it's probably the same for the audience too.
This is literally a full day workshop. I mean,
yeah,
we're not even scratching the surface here in terms of just the metaphysical development that is atypical and how that sets our kids up. I mean, that's a full morning just in learning metaphysically how the brain operates and how the brain controls our messaging and how it intakes and how it outtakes and all that kind of stuff. And it just, our kids are just so wired to be anxious. It's something we have to really pay attention to. And we can do that very early on with developing a lot of metacognition around who they are and self-acceptance. And then we diminish that, you know, that odds that they are going to struggle with worry and anxiety later on if we start early.
And even with younger students, do you start with some form of helping them understand the way their brain works?
Absolutely. I deal with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds sometimes.
Yeah.
Basic information. This is what your body's doing to you. Okay. They can understand sensory prints, right? The first 5 years of life, and even in the womb, kids are developing sensory information, right? And the most sensory information is the first 5 to 10 years of their lives, right? As we begin to build a knowledge base of sensory information, we are then able to start pruning once we get a little bit older, right? As we get more mature. So those sensory experiences become reflections more and, you know, memories. And so it's really essential in terms of the first 5 to 10 years of life in terms of having them develop a balance of positive sensory information and being able to handle that versus, negative stressors. And so negative stressors can lead to all kinds of issues. I won't give you all the stats here right now, but it's the difference between the two is so great. It is actually unbelievable when you look at it. And so when you're dealing with that's just the normal population. When you're dealing with kids as intense as our kids, the risks and the odds are much greater that they can be overwhelmed. We call the sensory input valve the arousal meter in the brain. And if you look at pictures of it, it's actually wider, it's denser, and it's reaching farther into the brain than a typical peer. So the ability for us to translate that sensory information into knowledge is much greater. Kids that are probably third standard deviation, we're talking about intake of 3 to 4 times greater than their typical peers. And so you think about that in terms of that volume coming at them, and now, when we grew up, I didn't even have a TV, right? Think about that. Think about all the stuff that's coming at our kids now with the social media, with they all have their pads, they have their phones, they have so much access to information and a lot less control of that access, right? So what are they getting? What kind of messages are they feeding themselves, or are we letting them feed themselves, right? To a point where it's no wonder I've got kids that are 5, 6 years old struggling with existential depression because they can't handle what's going on around them, because all that imagery, right?
Yeah.
And trauma resides in the visual cortex of the brain. There's a reason for that, right? Because when we see, we can react. This is why we see soldiers coming back with PTSD, because it's a visual processing of information, and when it overwhelms through the visual cortex, it feeds into our fear system to a point where we can't handle it anymore. And this is why I got really interested in the trauma piece, because I'm actually seeing a lot of kids, gifted 2E kids, are struggling with school-induced trauma because of that bang as they get into school with high expectations and then completely misunderstood, and then again treating neurological responses as behaviors rather than premeditated behaviors. So they get in trouble a lot. Why can't you sit still? Why can't you focus? Why can't you concentrate? Why can't you do it this way? Why can't you slow down like everyone else? You're going too fast. Blah, blah, blah.
So how do we, as a parent, how do we help a teacher understand what's going on, advocate? How do you help show a teacher the way to compassion when they might not have any background in gifted education?
I go back to the research. I always go back to the research. I did a lot of teacher training before the pandemic shut down travel, and I would do full day trainings with teachers, some gifted, many of them not. Not gifted, but teaching gifted kids, some of them not. And the real kicker is convincing them that this child is metaphysically different. It's not just that they're gifted and elitist. It's not this, hey, this is a parent fantasy. My child's this, and blah, blah, blah. It's not that at all. So when we bring it to the table, all the differences in terms of the brain development, meaning the brain actually in gifted kids, the farther they are away from the norm, the larger the brain is. The more intake, the more white matter, the more gray matter. The corpus callosum is different. All kinds of pieces in the brain are metaphysically different. The amygdala is different. It's bigger. So it's going to react in a more intense manner, right? All those things are factors. So I teach them that. And I actually spend 2 hours just on that, because I want to give them a basis for understanding that these kids are not typical kids. These kids are not going to react in a typical manner. They are going to have different sensory issues, right? If you have a classroom and you have, really bright lights, some of your kids, maybe have 2 or 3 of them that are 2E or gifted, really may struggle with that. They may lose focus and attention. So it's a metaphysical thing, first of all. And then when you understand that they are different and that they need a different pathway to instruction, that they need trust, they need companionship, they need, sensory interaction, right? You learn through your senses. You don't learn just auditorially from dictation. all those different things. Then you can start applying all the strategies in terms of good instruction, right? Front loading instruction, pre-assessing kids to know where they are so you can guide them rather than have them sit there and wait. Grouping strategies, all kinds of stuff predicates on an understanding of who the child is. So if you don't understand who the child is, why would I teach them differently?
Yeah. I'd like to have your 2 hours on the way the brain is different. So next time you're out and about, let me know so I can fly in and listen to that.
Well, if you're getting snow, I'm not going to be there.
Yeah. You're not? No,
not
come on.
Snow. You know, I spent 18 years in Minnesota. That's where my wife
you paid your dues.
Let
me ask one more question. Let me ask one parting question for the parents. You said that I love that quote you had that worriers have good imaginations.
Mm-hmm.
As a parent, as every parent watching this can imagine themselves as that worrier, right? Like, what do you tell yourself? What do you tell yourself in that situation? If you can intercept that as a parent, what do you tell yourself?
Well, for me, that good imagination means that if I can get myself back into, a manageable humanoid mode of thinking, right, where I'm not battling the anxiety, I can be highly, highly creative. I can be a problem solver. I can tackle the issues in a really cognitive manner, right? So that's where we want to be. Just because you have anxiety doesn't mean you have anxiety 24/7, right? It comes up when you start to feel the angst and something feels off, right? So that's why, again, the scanning for threats piece of anxiety just means that they're intensely aware that I could default back into that fight, flight, freeze, but it's not there constantly, right? I've never seen a kid that's constantly, feeling on edge, right? So if you have them in a safe place and you have them in a trustworthy place and you're listening to them and you're talking through what anxiety is, you're talking through how it's affecting their lives, then we can get creative and start thinking about, okay, what are some ways and means from a creative perspective that we can battle this stuff together, right? Mm-hmm. So here are some things. I just give a few things, breathing techniques and different little strategies here and there. But let's look at a comprehensive plan in terms of understanding, first of all, what's happening here, what's happening here. We know the brain is, we call, the gut is the second brain. So anxious thoughts go straight to the gut, right? This is why we see stomach aches and all kinds of stuff going on with anxious kids. But really, can we use your creativity? You can use that anxiety into your benefits. The same thing I do with 2E. I said, you're struggling maybe with this, but maybe you have dyslexia or dysgraphia. That's a gift to me because it allows you to be different than other kids and it allows you a different perspective from other kids. Anxiety is the same thing. It allows you to see things from different ways. All right. Somebody's here, apparently. So to me, the two are connected in a sense because if you can get back into, the balance in your brain, you can use that creativity. I mean, anxious kids are problem solvers by nature. 2E kids are problem solvers by nature because they have to be. They're going through their day problem solving, trying to fit in, trying to find a way out, right? That's their natural tendency. So if we can help and guide them through the process of, whether it's at school, whether it's home. And then the second piece is, if school is one of the problems, your home base has got to be the antidote. It's got to be the place where they can come and relax and feel that they can release some of that anxiety. As parents, we have to respect that. So it's super important. And we would hope that they could do both, right? That, they could handle and master that anxiety, maybe not master it, but get to a point where they can manage it to be able to get back into school, be able to get back into a workplace for our young adults, things like that. But again, if you don't recognize it, if you don't name it, and you don't understand it, it's really difficult to do. And again, back to if you don't understand yourself, too many gifted kids, too many 2E kids are lost because they don't understand why or who they are. And again, that is the platform for inviting anxiety in.
Yeah, and I think we can start as trying to understand ourselves as parents as well.
Yep.
Thank you so much. This is Dr. Mike Postma. He's Gifted and Thriving. If you're looking online, you can find more information there. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and packing so much into a short time. I'd love to hear more and more. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you guys. Thanks for listening, and for the opportunity. And yeah, I'd love to see you guys again sometime soon. So
Right.
thanks, Mark. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.